This oil rig has a dark secret. I'd just finished training for oil rig work. My mom thought I was nuts. But honestly, I was excited. Adventure had a new name and it was called the Kraken. Yeah, that was the actual name of the rig.
The helicopter was headed straight for the middle of nowhere. I couldn't help but stick my face against the window. I felt like a kid on his way to Disneyland. Except instead of roller coasters and Mickey Mouse, I was headed to the Gulf of Mexico and getting a huge paycheck out of it. As we started our descent, the rig came into view. It looked like a giant metal monster in the middle of the ocean. It was one of the oldest in the Gulf. The pay was unbelievable, and the recruiter said something about a special bonus if I finished my contract. I signed up as soon as I got my certifications. The moment my boots hit the deck of the Kraken, I was hit with a smell of salty air and oil. The noise was louder than I expected. There was a constant hum of machinery that made the ground vibrate. A couple of guys in different colored vests waited for us. I was told to go to the guy in orange. He looked like he'd been out here for months. He had rough, leathery skin and a slight limp. "What's your name, son?" he asked over the noise. "You can call me Sully, sir. I'm the new welder," I said. "Sully, huh? Well, welcome to the Kraken. I'm Gene, the head welder around here. Now, first rule of survival. Always wear this." He handed me a silver pin. Engraved on it was a sea monster attacking a whale. "Put it on. Keep it on you at all times. In the shower, in bed, it doesn't matter, okay? Just make sure you have it," Gene insisted, fixing me with a stare that said, "Don't ask stupid questions." I clipped the pin to my shirt, noticing for the first time that everyone around me wore the same thing. Gene started walking, and I followed, trying to take it all in. The rig was a damn maze. I'd never seen anything so big in my entire life. "So here's the deal. This place is more than nuts and bolts," he began. "There are rules that aren't in the manual, but it's important you follow them if you want to survive the job. So, you remember what rule number 1 is?" Gene raised an eyebrow at me. "Yeah, always wear the pin," I said. The old man nodded with approval. "That's right, rookie. It lets them know you're part of the crew. They can't take you before your time." As we walked, Gene kept the tour going, pointing out parts of the rig I remembered from the safety videos. "Yeah, and over here's the rec center. This is where you spend most of your downtime." We entered through the double doors into a surprisingly cozy area. There was a gym and a snack counter. Next to it was a small library filled with books and board games. Gene opened another door to a room with a few sofas and a large TV. And yes, a ping pong table. "So here's the lounge. Got decent internet, too. It's all about keeping sane out here. Being cooped up for weeks, it can mess with your head if you're not very careful," he said. It made sense. You see, people couldn't just leave the rig when the weekend rolled around. The deal was, I'd be on the Kraken for a whole month. After that, they'd fly us back to shore for 3 weeks of vacation. Then it was back to the Kraken until the contract ended. So it was nice to know there were plenty of ways to unwind here. Finally, Gene showed me to the dorm room. It was basic. Bunk bed, a small desk, and a locker for personal items. My roommate was a guy named Clive. He was the only other welder on the rig. But we wouldn't be seeing each other much. With only 2 welders on board, someone always had to be on duty. so we worked around each other's shifts. Before entering the room, I noticed a red metal door at the end of the hall. Jean grabbed me by the arm and pointed at the door. "That's the second rule here, Sully. That door. You never open it, you got that? No matter what you hear." "What's behind it?" I asked. "Restricted area. You don't want to end up like Joe," he said. Jean told me the whole story. It was just before his time at the Kraken. Joe was an odd guy, mostly kept to himself, but he was damn good with the machines. Always had his wrench at the ready. But one day, things got weird for him. He just started packing up all of a sudden. Boots, clothes, even snagged his pillow off his bunk. Everyone was scratching their heads because his leave wasn't due for another week. His friends asked him about it, but the only thing Joe said was that he needed to go home. So they thought it was a family emergency. But instead of heading up to the chopper pad, he walked straight to the red door with all his stuff. Nobody followed him, of course. Even back then, everyone knew the rule about the red door. But management lost their heads. They said anyone who even touched the door would lose their job. And then a day later, oil started leaking out from under it. Lots of it. It came out as a trickle at first. The techs thought there was a system leak. The last thing you want on a rig is an oil spill. But the operators, they just waved it off and told everyone to ignore it. But it kept coming. Soon enough, petroleum filled the hallway. Jean said it got up to an inch deep. Took 3 days before it stopped, and it took the cleanup crew a whole week to mop it up. But the smell lingered for months. Joe's family was told that he fell off the rig and drowned, but one of the cleanup guys found something in the mess. It was Joe's wedding ring, right in the middle of the oil spill. It was pretty clear what I was supposed to get from that story. Rule number 2, don't enter the red door. After dinner, I decided to get some fresh air and headed to the upper deck. The rig operated 24/7. It was still noisy at night. But beyond the Kraken, the Gulf was pretty peaceful. It was miles and miles of endless ocean. As I looked out over the water, something caught my eye. It was too dark to make out clearly at first. Whatever it was, it blocked out the stars. I moved closer to the edge to get a better look. A massive shape moved in the distance. It rose up, and I realized what it was. A tidal wave. It was forming not far from us. The wave grew taller until it was as high as the deck I was standing on. I couldn't say how quickly it was moving, but I knew those things traveled very fast. I turned to run, and I slammed right into Jean. "Whoa, what's got you running like a scared cat?" he asked. It's a tsunami or something. It's huge. Look, it's gonna hit the rig," I replied. "Hey, relax, son. We don't get tsunamis here in the Gulf. Not like that, anyway," Jean said, not bothering to look at all. Instead, he put a calming hand on my shoulder. "But look at it," I insisted. Jean paused, then asked, "Did you look east at the sunset?" I don't know, I'm not maybe," I said. "That's the third rule, Sully. Never look directly into the eastern sea after sunset. You can't trust anything you see out there," he replied. What the hell was he talking about? How could we just ignore a massive wave coming right at us? I tried to shove him towards the railing so he could see for himself. But he was stronger than he looked. He didn't even budge. Instead, he steered me around until I was facing away from the swell. "Son, look. The ocean screws with the man's head," he began. "You're gonna see a lot of things out here you won't understand. That's why we got these rules. You'll learn each of them when the time comes. So if you see anything off, you come to me first, you got that?" But I couldn't let it go. "Look, I know what I saw. We're gonna risk everyone's lives over a bunch of superstitions." Gene remained calm, but there was an edge to his voice now. "If that wave was real, don't you think we'd all be drinking seawater by now?" I froze. He was right. Gene led me back down to my room. He told me I had an early start tomorrow and to get some rest. I just nodded and began kicking off my shoes. But just before he left, he made me say the third rule. Rule number 3. Never look at the Eastern Ocean after sunset. My alarm rang, marking the start of my first official day on the Kraken. Rolling out of bed, I noticed Clive was knocked down on his booth, exhausted from his own shift. After getting ready, I headed to the mess hall where I grabbed a quick breakfast. The day ahead was going to be a full one. Gene handed me my schedule after I ate. As a rig crew, we were on for 12-hour shifts, but thankfully, they fed us 4 times a day and we got plenty of breaks. Being the new guy, my job for the day was to shadow Gene. This meant I'd get a first-hand look at what it took to keep the Kraken running. Our work as welders was crucial out here. Sea air corroded metal very fast. My first task was to help Gene replace a section of railing that had rusted through. And as I cut it away, I could see how much the salt had eaten into it. We measured and cut a new piece. Then I followed Gene's lead, fixing the new metal into place with clean welds. As the day went on, we moved from one job to another. I got a real education in just how much work it took to keep everything together. We spent most of our time fixing leaky pipes and replacing rusty bolts. By the afternoon, I was getting the hang of things. That was when Gene said we needed to go to the drilling floor for urgent maintenance. As we made our way there, he dropped another one of his rules. Rule number 4. Don't speak unless spoken to when near the drill, he said. Gene led me down to the drilling floor, a whole different world from the rest of the rig. It was hot and cramped down here. The entire crew was covered in grease. As I followed Gene, I noticed everyone was using hand signals to communicate. Made total sense, considering how loud the machines were. But they kept silent, even when they were standing next to each other, only using hand signs. I guess down here, they took that rule seriously. We kept moving deeper into the rig, and the deeper we went, the smell of petroleum and seawater got stronger. There was a constant rushing sound around me, like being next to a fast-flowing river. The walls vibrated with the force of the machinery and the ocean around us. Finally, we arrived at a section where the pipes on the wall were shaking. They looked like they could fall off at any moment. Gene pointed them out and gestured to his kit. I got the picture. We got straight to work. I grabbed the welding gear while Gene held the new mounts in place. Working here wasn't just about sticking pieces together. It was about making sure everything stayed where it should. The job took all my concentration as I tried to make the welds as strong as possible. In this part of the rig, a bad weld didn't just mean a repair job. It could mean disaster. As we worked, I heard a sudden groaning noise. The whole space tilted to one side. I lost my footing, and my head banged against the pipe. Damn it, what the hell was that? I cursed. Gene quickly gestured at me to keep quiet, his eyes wide and serious. But before I could respond, a deep moaning sound echoed around us again. It was louder this time. It vibrated through my chest. It came in waves that got louder and then softer, almost like a whale song. But it felt like it came from something much bigger. I was suddenly aware of how small I was, and how easy it would be to get crushed by the steel above me, or how easy it would be for the ocean to just knock us down. We shouldn't be here, I thought. Some deep part of my mind was screaming at me to get out of here, because something big was coming. It felt like my head was splitting open. Gene ripped off his helmet and put a hand over my mouth. I noticed blood trickling from his nose. The terrible noise continued as he kept his hand firmly over my mouth. I did my best to stay calm. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but eventually the noise faded away. The rig steadied, and I could hear the familiar sounds of machinery again. Gene removed his hand before wiping his nose with his sleeve. He put a finger to his lips to remind me to stay quiet. Then, when he was sure that I was okay, he went back to welding like nothing happened. I followed his lead. I could still feel my head throb. I was sure this was going to give me a migraine. After we finished the job, we packed up our gear and walked out of the lower decks. I felt the crew's eyes on me when we passed by. Once we reached the surface, I couldn't hold my questions any longer. Okay, Gene, what the hell just happened down there? I asked. That's why there's a rule about talking near the drill, he began. The closer you are to the drill, the more it can hear you. It. Oh, okay, what is it? I asked. Gene shrugged. He looked tired. Look, that's what I was told when I started here. I don't have all the answers, Sully. This rig, it's different. You've got to respect the rules if you want to stay safe. Okay, and are there other rules I should know about? I said. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There are 3 more rules you need to remember. Rule number 5, no red meat on Wednesdays. Rule number 6, do not ignore the bell when it rings 3 times. Then, Gene looked around to see if anyone was near. He looked scared. This last one, it's the most important rule of all. But you're not supposed to know about it this early. But trust me, it's for everyone's sake. I'll tell you when it's time, he said. Alright, come on, Gene, cut the bullshit, okay? If it's so important, why keep it a damn secret? How am I gonna keep people safe if I don't even know how to do that? I said. Gene looked exhausted, like all the years on the rig were finally getting to him. Look, son, please just trust me on this, alright? I've kept you alive this long. Just remember those 6 rules, and I'll tell you the last one when you need to hear it, okay? The rest of the shift passed by without anything else happening. Gene was all about business after our talk. His calm attitude helped me get back into the routine of the work. I started to relax, forgetting about what happened in the lower decks. As the days passed, life on the rig fell into a predictable pattern. Wednesday came around, And like you said, we didn't get any red meat that day. I heard a few grumbles from the crew about not getting bacon for breakfast, but it seemed like everyone knew this was coming. I didn't mind. The chicken fajitas I ate were the best I'd ever had. But I did see something that day. I was getting a second helping of beans when I saw the cooks filling up an oil drum with meat, chops, sausages, even a whole leg of lamb. They threw them in straight from the freezer. A steward checked off a list every time they put something in. But that drum wasn't just full of meat. Every time they threw something in, I could see crude oil splash against the rim. When it was full, they wheeled the drum out of the kitchen. I had no idea where they were headed. Gene saw me looking at the whole process. All he could do was shrug and say, "That's Wednesdays for you." Other than that, the week went by peacefully. We went around the rig, replacing anything too rusty to be useful, or doing minor maintenance when we weren't busy. Sometimes, I'd get time in the afternoon to play a game of pool. But at night, I'd see things from the corner of my eye when I was on the upper deck. If it was from the east, I ignored it. Sometimes, there'd be lights on the water, bright yellows and greens. Other times, there'd be a thick fog. One time, I swore something huge flew past the rig. It was a massive shape passing behind us. But overall, I was getting used to being on the Kraken. I did finally meet Clive at some point. He was a funny guy when he wasn't snoring into a pillow. He told me his contract had been renewed 6 times so far. He had 2 kids he was putting through college back in Louisiana. And that was something I noticed a lot too. The crew would often talk about how many contract renewals they'd signed up for. But it was like there was an unspoken hierarchy about that. The more times someone had signed up again, the more respect people seemed to give them. Didn't matter what rank they were. I'd seen guys get into arguments against their supervisors. And you know what the crazy thing was? I'd seen drilling heads back down when renewals got brought up. Other than that, the crew got along really well. Before I knew it, I was a couple of days away from going on leave. But something happened that made me question whether I'd even want to go back to the Kraken. It was a Tuesday. Me and Gene were back below deck. We were fixing up railings on the walkways. I'd gotten used to the occasional groan or tilting under there. Just as we were about to finish up, a bell rang over the PA system. 3 loud clangs, one after the other. Gene paused and looked at me. "You remember what that means, right?" I knew we weren't supposed to ignore the bell, but I was fuzzy on the details. "Yeah, we shouldn't ignore the bell, but what exactly are we supposed to do?" I replied. "Leave your gear. Follow me to the safe rooms," he said as he took off his helmet. Safe rooms? I couldn't remember anything about safe rooms during training. Still, I followed Gene's lead. We made our way back to the upper decks. Other crew joined us, all headed the same way. The safe rooms turned out to be 3 large rooms on the rig. Each one was equipped with a small medic station and bathrooms. Gene led me into one of them. Looking around, I noticed some guys who looked like they'd just woken up. Clive was one of them. His hair was a mess, and he was standing around in his boxers. And yet, he was still wearing his silver pin. Once everyone was inside, the bell rang out 3 more times. Then, a couple of operators slid the door shut. My eyes were drawn to the inside of the door as it closed. It was covered in writing, though it wasn't any language I recognized. They looked Egyptian to me because of these little drawings. There was a drawing of a fish with big eyes, a circle with tentacles coming out of it, a snake with 2 heads, and a bunch of other characters made up of dots and sharp lines. Jean wandered over to one of the chairs lining the back wall and sat down. Everyone around me started making themselves comfortable. Seemed like we'd be here a while. I saw Clive sit in a corner and nod off. And then there was a knock on the door. Everyone froze, like they were very scared of what would happen next. I looked over at Clive. He was wide awake now, his face going pale. The knocking continued. Then a voice started shouting to let him in. The operators were huddled by the door. It was clear they were arguing with each other, but I couldn't really hear what they were saying. All around me, people were getting into their own debates. Tensions were rising. I looked back at Jean, but his eyes were fixed firmly at the door, his fingers rubbing at the pin on his shirt. The man outside continued to yell. He begged us to let him in. He said it wasn't fair that he got locked out. He was asleep when the bells rang, and his dorm was the farthest away from the safe rooms. The operators seemed to come to a decision. 2 of them opened the doors just a crack, but it wasn't big enough to let the guy through. A couple of the guys behind me started shouting. They said not to risk everyone's lives. Some of them yelled about how the rules needed to be followed. The senior operator walked up to the opening and whispered something. Hobbs, I think his name was. Shouting broke out. The man outside started shoving his fingers through the door. He was trying to force himself through. I could hear Hobbs now. You get back or we'll crush those fingers, Barker. You know the rules. We can't let you in. Barker, the man behind the door, started pleading, saying he renewed 10 times, that he was almost done paying for his wife's medical bills. Then you shouldn't have left your damn pin. Barricade your dorm. Maybe you'll survive, all right? Hobbs said back. And then I saw something that still haunts me to this day. The senior operator grabbed his radio, and he slammed it on Barker's fingers. I heard something snap. Barker howled like a dog as he pulled away. And just like that, they shut the doors on him. Silence fell over the crowd, and then the rig pitched to one side. I could feel the floor vibrate before I heard a loud noise from below. Everyone get down. You know what to do, Hobbs said. People fell on their knees, trying not to fall on one another as they sat down. I followed their lead, and I waited for it to be over. But behind the door, Barker started screaming. The rig was tilting side to side now. It was like we were in a hurricane. All around me, people were rubbing their silver pins. Their eyes were wide with fear. Then, another groan came from below, but this one sounded more like a howl. It completely covered up Barker's yelling. The vibrations bounced around my chest and worked their way up to my fillings. Someone gagged behind me. I could feel the nausea building up, too. This was just like that first day, when Jean warned me about talking in the lower decks. I looked up, and the writings on the door looked like they were moving. The fish with 2 eyes blinked at me. The 2-headed snake wrapped around a drawing of a human. The thing with the tentacles spun around like a whirlwind. Human figures danced in a chain. And then suddenly, it all stopped. The Kraken stopped rocking. The painful groaning disappeared. The writing on the door was the same as before. For a few moments, no one said anything. Then the bells rang out on the PA system again. The guys at the front started opening the doors. But no one else moved. Hobbs walked out and immediately ran back in. "You all stay in your dorms until further notice," he told us. I wasn't going to argue. But as I got to the doors, I could see why he said that. There wasn't much of Barker left outside the safe room. I saw his shoe caught in some pipes on the ceiling. I tried to avoid stepping on anything red, but there were chunks scattered all over the hallway, and mixed in with the gore was shimmering black oil. I went on my assigned leave a few days after that. I didn't really have anywhere to go. I just bummed around Cancun till it was time for me to go back. Now, I did think about quitting, but I really should have read the fine print on that contract before I signed. Turns out, I was under bond, which meant that if I quit early, I'd have to pay up 3 months' worth of my salary, plus a bunch of other penalties. I didn't have that kind of money, and I was still paying for the loans I had to take out to get certified for this job. People like to say that we always have a choice. What no one ever tells you, though, is that a lot of times you get screwed no matter what you pick. Soon enough, I was back on a copter on my way to the Kraken. The atmosphere was a lot more tense than when I started a few months ago. People really didn't joke around as much anymore, or even talk to one another during breaks. And I'm not the type to rat somebody out, but a lot of empty tequila bottles started popping up in the rec areas. At the end of my first week back, Gene brought out his own and poured me a shot. "You still remember all those rules, Sully? The ones not in the manuals?" he slurred out. I turned down the drink, but I nodded. I could never forget them. "Well, here's the thing. Now's the time to tell you about that last one. The most important one." Gene leaned over, and he lowered his voice. So rule number 7. Everyone joins the raffle," he whispered. I had wondered for weeks what the big secret rule was. That was the last thing I expected. A raffle. Okay, what does that mean? I asked. But Gene looked like he was about to pass out. "Oh, it's a big thing. Lots of money going round. But remember, my boy, you gotta be there," he said, as he pushed himself off me, and he wandered off the bed. He wouldn't tell me anything else about the raffle after that. All he said was that it's something the company does at the end of everyone's 3-month contract. I pretty much kept my head down for the next couple weeks. I did my job, had my pin on me all the time, and I stayed out of people's way. Things were getting a lot more hostile among the crew. I heard a lot more arguments break out. I never actually saw a fight, but I've seen some people walking around with cuts and bruises. And then finally, it was time for the raffle. It was everyone's last day on the job, unless someone agreed to renew, of course. I looked over my shift schedule that day, and I saw the entire evening was blocked out for the raffle. Everyone was supposed to gather at the main deck after the last dinner shift. The cooks went all out that night, steak and lobster for everyone. But no one seemed hungry. I finished up my food and I hung around the rec center until it was time to go up. At around 9 p.m., the PA system told everyone to go to the main deck. When I got there, the crowd was forming a rough circle around Hobbs and the other senior managers. They were setting up a bingo cage and some speakers. Behind them was a large oil drum. I found Gene in the crowd, and I got up next to him. Everyone looked nervous and twitchy. Then Hobbs picked up a mic and addressed the crowd. "Evening, everyone. Good job on getting to the end of your contracts. Now, before we do the raffle, I want to clarify something. What happened to Ron Barker was tragic, but it did not count. We made a deal to keep the oil flowing, to keep the Kraken floating, to keep the money coming. We follow the rules, and we do the raffle every 3 months. Now, Mr. Barker, he broke the rules, and we still have to do this." Hobbs cleared his throat and continued. The good news, though, is that the company will be doing a 10% increase on this round's bonuses. Just this once. Everyone who doesn't win the raffle will get the usual bonus plus the increase on top. Sound good? That did sound good to me. I'd forgotten about that end of contract bonus. I remember reading something about that in the paperwork, but no one else seemed as excited about it as I was. The only reaction Hobbs got was a couple of weak cheers. He didn't really care, though. He signaled to the guy mixing up the bingo cage. He gave it a few more turns, then took out a wooden ball. Without looking at it, he handed the ball to Hobbs. "The winner of this round's raffle is Mr. Clive Harper," Hobbs said. A loud cry erupted to my right. There was a scuffle and some shouting, until finally, Clive was brought to the middle. 2 big men held him down. Gene's hand clamped on my arm. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, "It'll be over soon, all right? Just think of that bonus. Think of all the good it'll do for your family. That's why most of us are here now," he said, and it sounded like he was pleading with me. One of the managers opened up the oil drum behind Hobbs. She dipped a large cup in it and walked over to where Clive was kneeling. He was crying and begging now. A man grabbed him by the hair and forced his head back. And then she poured thick black oil down Clive's throat. She didn't stop until the cup was empty. I could hear Clive gagging until he threw up the oil. And as soon as he did, the other managers ran up and they dipped paintbrushes into the mess. Then they ran off to the edge of the rig and they started painting. They drew symbols on the floor, going around the perimeter of the Kraken, symbols like the ones I saw in the safe room. Every now and then, they'd go back and dip their paintbrush in the stuff Clive threw up. The crowd was silent. No one moved, except to let the managers pass through. The only thing I could hear was Clive gagging. "Gene, what the hell is going on? What is this?" I demanded. Gene looked at me. "Someone has to do it, kid. That's part of the deal the company made with whatever's keeping the well full. But the bosses, they give everyone a bonus for having to go through this. Some of these guys, They've been renewing their contracts for years without getting chosen. It's all down to luck in the end, he explained. But, Clive, the medics are gonna save him, right? He got it all out, I said. Jean's eyes glazed over. Kid. Once the managers finished painting all around the rig, move to the back of the crowd, you hear me? You don't have to do this next part, but you need to stay inside the drawings for the whole thing, he said. The crowd tensed up then. It was like they were all getting ready for something. And then I saw the managers stop painting. Jean pushed me to the back as the crowd surged. Everyone ran towards Clive. Their hands reached out for him. I heard Clive scream for hours.